The Light We Built. Chapter 1. A Room of Her Own. Margaret had insisted on the dining room. When the apartment above the diner was built, that had been the one thing she would not compromise on. The men who framed the place had tried to persuade her otherwise. A breakfast nook would be simpler. A kitchen table would save space. Margaret had only shaken her head. "If we're living above it," she had said calmly, "we sit together properly." So the dining room sat square and steady just off the apartment kitchen. The table was solid maple Noah had finished himself years earlier, sanded smooth by time and daily use. The surface held the faint marks of 1,000 small moments, coffee cups set down in a hurry, school books dragged across the grain, the quiet scrape of plates being gathered after supper. 4 chairs sat around it, their backs worn slightly where hands had pulled them out and pushed them in again thousands of times. A sideboard stood against the far wall. The west window above it caught the evening light and held it a little longer than the rest of the apartment, as if reluctant to let the day go. It was there Margaret painted, not during the day, never during the rush. The diner below filled the hours from morning through supper with more work than any one person could name. Coffee, orders, dishes, deliveries, the endless quiet rhythm of service. Painting happened only after supper, after dishes were dried and stacked, after the boys had gone down the hallway to their rooms. She would clear the table carefully, the same way she cleared it every night. Plates gathered, crumbs brushed aside with the flat of her palm, the oilcloth folded neatly and set aside. Then she would spread newspaper across the maple surface, brushes laid out in a row. The small tin of paint she kept tucked away in the pantry cabinet, placed beside them. The lamp would be angled slightly, so the shadow fell behind her hand instead of across the canvas. Then she would work, not for long, just enough to keep the motion alive in her hands before the day disappeared completely. Sometimes the room would grow so quiet she could hear the faint sounds from the diner kitchen below, the clink of a spoon left in the sink, the creak of the old refrigerator door settling closed. And when she finished, everything disappeared with it. Brushes rinsed in a small jar, paint lids tightened, newspaper folded and thrown away, the canvas lifted and carried to the corner beside the pantry door. By morning, the room would belong to breakfast again. Coffee cups, toast plates, school books, ledger papers waiting for the diner below. Margaret never complained about that. No one noticed anyway. He noticed the faint streaks of color that sometimes lingered along the edge of her thumb, even after she scrubbed her hands clean. The way the chair by the window never quite sat square the next morning, the careful angle of the canvas in its corner, so no one brushed against it walking past. Every night the same pattern, every morning the same erasing. He said nothing. One evening, he came upstairs later than usual. The diner below had finally gone quiet. The last dish had been dried. The kitchen lights had been dimmed until only the stairwell lamp burned. Upstairs, the apartment held the stillness that came after a long day. The boys were in their rooms. A faint rustle of pages turning drifted down the hallway, where one of them was still reading before sleep. Margaret stood at the dining table. The lamp cast a warm circle of light across the canvas, and the wood grained beneath it. The smell of oil paint hung lightly in the air, mixed with the faint scent of coffee that always seemed to linger in the apartment. She was working the edge of a sky, thin strokes of blue fatting into a wash of pale gold. Her brush moved slowly, patiently, as if she were trying to hold the last of the evening light on the canvas before it disappeared entirely. She stepped back, studied the color, then glanced toward the clock. The brush lowered. Without a word, she began rinsing it in the small jar beside her. "You can leave it," Noah said quietly. She didn't look up. "It'll be in the way." That was the truth. By morning, the table would belong to the family again. She dried the brush, wrapped the paints, lifted the canvas, and carried it to the corner beside the pantry door. Turned inward, waiting. Noah stood there, a moment longer than necessary. Then he reached over and turned off the lamp. The next morning, he walked the yard behind the diner before the sun cleared the trees. The air still held the cool of night. Dew clung to the short grass and darkened the soil between the vegetable rows further out. Nothing about the yard was neglected. The chicken house sat to one side, its white boards weathered but straight. A few hens scratched lazily near the fence line, the soft rustle of their feathers the only sound in the early morning. Beyond them, the vegetable garden stretched neat and deliberate. Beans climbing the lines Jack had strung that spring. Tomato vines heavy with green fruit not yet ready for harvest. Closer to the building, the ground opened wide and level. Grass kept short, clear of debris. Useful space. Noah stood there a long while. He studied the light. The sun would rise behind the trees and cross the yard at an angle before the heat of the day settled in. Enough light to work by. Not so much that the room would overheat by afternoon. He looked once toward the diner wall, then toward the small bed of herbs Margaret kept near the back steps, far enough away that the noise of the kitchen wouldn't carry, close enough she would never feel removed from the life of the place. Separate, he pressed his heel into the soil. Firm, then he turned and went back upstairs. Margaret had already gone down to open the diner. The apartment was quiet. Noah spread a sheet of paper across the dining room table, the same table she cleared every night. He measured once along the edge, then began drawing. He didn't pause to consider proportions. He already knew them. The north wall came first, a wide window centered cleanly, not decorative, purposeful. He drew the outer walls next, square and tight, then marked the interior partition. 2 rooms, a smaller room behind the first, a restroom tucked neatly along the side, where plumbing could run clean back toward the diner line. Simple, solid, the roof line came last. The pencil moved steadily across the paper until the plan sat finished on the table. No erasing. Jack came downstairs halfway through. He stopped when he saw the paper. "What's that?" Noah didn't look up. "Hold this." Jack stepped forward automatically, pressing his thumb against the edge of the paper while Noah finished the last line. "What are we building?" Jack asked. Noah set the pencil down. "A place." "For what?" He slid the paper toward him. She shouldn't have to put it away every night. Jack looked toward the corner beside the pantry door, where the canvas leaned, then back at the drawing. 2 rooms, a restroom, a wide north window, not attached to the diner. Something separate. "You'll frame it with me," Noah said. It wasn't a question. Jack nodded once. When the hammering begins, Oscar is already outside. He has finished gathering eggs from the chicken house and returned the basket to the kitchen for Margaret. Afterward, he wandered back into the yard the way he often did when the diner grew busy. The morning air is cool. Oscar sits on the low wooden crate near the fence and watches the chickens scratch through the dirt. They move slowly, tilting their heads, studying the ground before pecking. Oscar likes that. It makes sense to him. The first hammer strike carries across the yard. He turns. Noah and Jack are standing in the open grass behind the diner. A board is balanced upright between them, while Noah drives a nail through the top plate. Oscar watches for a long time before walking closer. He stops several yards away. Jack notices him first. "What are you doing out here?" Jack asks. Oscar points toward the boards. "What's that?" Noah answers simply. "A room." Oscar studies the square marked in the grass. The boards don't look like the diner. They don't look like the chicken house either. He tilts his head slightly. "For what?" Noah wipes his hands on his work pants. "You'll see." Oscar nods once. That answer is enough. He doesn't ask anything else. Instead, he walks back toward the garden and sits again on the crate near the fence. From there, he can still hear the hammering rising and falling through the yard. He listens, not curious in the way Jack would be, just letting the sound exist. Margaret heard the hammering just before noon. At first, she assumed Jack was repairing the fence again, but the rhythm was wrong. Too steady, too deliberate. She stepped out the back door, wiping her hands on the apron tied around her waist. The yard looked different. String marked a square in the open grass. Jack held a board upright while Noah drove a nail clean through the top plate. The frame of a wall stood where the ground had been empty only hours before. Margaret walked closer. "What are you building?" Noah finished the nail. He was driving before answering. "A room." For what? He looked at her directly. For you. She stiffened. We don't need this. He set the hammer down. It's yours. The words settled quietly between them. She looked again at the frame. The interior wall marked out. The chalk line where plumbing would run. This wasn't temporary. This was meant to stand. Her throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. Make sure it's level. Then she turned and went back inside. The building rose quickly after that. Walls framed, roof pitched and shingled, window set square. Margaret watched the progress without stepping inside. The first time she tried, Noah stopped her gently. Wait. For what? Let me finish it. So she did. He showed it to her on a quiet evening, no one else around. He opened the door and stepped aside. She walked in slowly. The north window filled the room with soft, steady light. A long bench ran beneath it. The wood floor was smooth beneath her feet. She opened the door to the smaller room, then the restroom. Everything finished, everything solid. She turned back toward him. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting lightly on the frame. I love you, he said. She looked at him a long moment. Then she crossed the room and touched the front of his shirt lightly near the collar. I love you too. That evening, after the dishes were done and the boys had gone to their rooms, Margaret stepped outside alone. She crossed the yard slowly, unlocked the door, and went inside. Later, Jack was putting the last of the tools away when he saw the light, warm and steady through the north window. He glanced toward Noah. She's in there. Noah didn't answer. He just finished stacking the boards beside the shed. Inside the diner kitchen, Oscar stood at the sink with a glass of water when he noticed the glow through the window. He paused and looked out across the yard. The studio window was bright against the dark grass. A few moments later, Jack stepped into the kitchen behind him. Oscar pointed quietly toward the yard. Jack followed his finger. Mom's painting, Jack said. Oscar smiled a little. Then he went back to the table. The light stayed on. Inside the studio, Margaret was painting. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have to clear the table before morning.